Space was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not peaceful, but empty. Like something had been forgotten in the dark, far away from any star, near a cold and lifeless moon. A massive alien warship drifted without direction, its metal surface burned and broken. Long scars running across its body where weapons had torn through it. Red emergency lights flickered inside like a dying heartbeat. And deep in the center of the ship, in a chamber filled with smoke and fading power, an alien woman sat. Strapped into a command chair, tall, armored, strong, but barely conscious, her blue skin marked with cuts. Her breathing slow as oxygen levels dropped. Her crew was gone. Escape pods launched hours ago. They had left her behind when the reactor failed, because in her empire weakness was not rescued. Weakness was erased, and now the ship was only minutes away from total shutdown. One final spark away from becoming a silent tomb in endless space. Far from that drifting warship, a small human salvage vessel moved carefully through the asteroid field. Its engines quiet, its lights low. The ship was old but clean, maintained with care instead of money. Inside the cockpit sat a human engineer named Daniel Hale. Not a soldier, not a hero, just a repair specialist who fixed broken machines for stations that could not afford new ones. He was running routine scans when his console picked up something strange. A signal too strong to be debris, too organized to be random. He frowned and adjusted the frequency. The shape appeared slowly on his screen, large, sharp, clearly military, and not human. Daniel knew that design. Every human pilot did. The Tauran Empire, powerful, advanced, and known for seeing humans as small and unimportant, their ships did not travel near human territory without purpose, and they did not lose battles easily. His first instinct was to turn away. A damaged Tauran warship could still destroy his small craft in seconds. But then he noticed something else. The ship was not aiming weapons. It was drifting, power output near zero, life support failing, and for a moment he just stared at the screen, thinking, if there was someone alive on that ship, they were running out of time. He whispered to himself that it was not his problem, that he was just a mechanic, but his hands were already moving across the controls, adjusting course slowly toward the silent giant. His ship looked like a tiny insect next to the broken war machine, metal pieces floating around it like frozen tears. As he docked carefully near a damaged service hatch, he could see the burn marks from inside. Something had exploded near the core. He hesitated for 1 second at the airlock, because he knew one truth very clearly. If a Tauran warrior was still alive in there, she would likely kill him, without question. Humans were considered weak, soft, disposable. The airlock opened with a long hiss. Smoke rolled out. The inside of the alien ship was darker than he expected. The hulls wide and sharp in design, glowing lines along the walls fading in and out. He moved slowly, scanner in hand, following faint life signs toward the command deck. Sparks fell from broken panels above him. The smell of burned circuits heavy in the air. When he reached the bridge doors, they were half melted. He forced them open with a portable cutter, and there she was, the alien commander, tall even while sitting, armor cracked but still strong, eyes closed, breathing weak. Daniel froze, because even unconscious, she looked dangerous, her hands large, claws sharp. This was not a scientist or pilot. This was a warrior, the type trained to destroy entire human fleets. And yet right now, she looked alone, abandoned. He checked the control panel beside her chair. Reactor critical, life support at 3%, total shutdown in 4 minutes. He had to choose fast, leave now, and survive. Or stay and try to fix a ship built by a species far more advanced than his own. He swallowed and opened his toolkit. He moved quickly to the secondary power lines, bypassing burned circuits, connecting temporary links using his own ship's portable battery pack. He did not understand every alien symbol, but he understood energy flow. Machines always followed rules even if cultures did not. Sweat ran down his face as warning lights blinked faster. The reactor temperature rising. One mistake would end both of them. He rerouted coolant systems manually, forced a restart on auxiliary support, and for a long second, nothing happened. Then the lights stabilized. The red glow softened to steady white. Oxygen flow increased, the humming of systems returning slowly like a waking giant. Daniel let out a quiet breath of relief. But that relief lasted only a heartbeat, because behind him he heard movement, slow and heavy. He turned, and her eyes were open, bright silver, focused directly on him. Not confused, not weak, but sharp and aware, she stood slowly from the command chair, towering over him even in damaged armor, studying the human standing inside her ship. And Daniel realized something important in that silent moment. He had just repaired the ship of someone who might see his kindness as invasion. She took one step toward him, her voice low but strong despite everything, and she asked in clear, careful human language, "Why are you here?" Before the story continues, and before things become even more dangerous, if you enjoy strong sci-fi stories like this, gently consider subscribing to this channel so you do not miss what happens next. Daniel tightened his grip on his toolcase because outside the ship long-range scanners were beginning to wake up, and somewhere in deep space, something else had already noticed the restart signal, and it was moving closer. She did not attack him immediately, and that alone made the silence heavier than any weapon. She stood tall in front of him, her silver eyes scanning every movement he made, measuring his height, his breathing, the small tremor in his fingers, and Daniel understood that she was not deciding whether he was dangerous. She was deciding whether he was worth killing. The bridge lights reflected off her cracked armor, pieces of advanced metal layered over powerful muscle, her presence filling the entire command deck. And yet the air between them felt thinner than before, as if one wrong word would remove all the oxygen he had just restored. "I asked you," she said again, her voice calm but edged with control. "Why are you inside my ship?" Daniel forced himself not to step back, because he knew fear would only confirm what her people already believed about humans, that they were small creatures who survived by hiding. He cleared his throat and answered in simple words. "Your reactor was failing, you're gonna die. I fixed broken things, so I fixed it." Her expression did not change, but her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was trying to understand a language deeper than the words themselves. In her empire, nothing was done without purpose. Every action carried strategy. Every kindness carried expectation. She slowly moved past him toward the main console, checking the system readouts with sharp precision. The ship was stabilizing. Auxiliary systems were online. Damage reports still critical, but no longer fatal. She touched a control panel, and holographic displays lit up around her, mapping internal repairs, and she could clearly see the human modifications, crude compared to tower design, yet effective, dangerously effective. "You altered primary circuits without full system knowledge," she said quietly, not accusing but analyzing. "One error would have destroyed the core." Daniel shrugged slightly, tried to appear calmer than he felt. Yes, but it did not. For a moment something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not gratitude, something closer to confusion, because in her training humans were described as emotional and impulsive, not precise under pressure. Yet this one had entered a hostile warship alone, repaired advanced technology under threat of explosion, and now stood in front of her without begging for mercy. It did not fit the image she had been taught since childhood. She stepped closer again, now only an arm's length away, and he could see faint glowing lines under her skin, part of her species' biological enhancements, proof that she was not only a commander, but genetically prepared for war. "My crew abandoned this vessel when the reactor destabilized," she said slowly. "They followed protocol, survival of command hierarchy. Damaged leaders are replaced, not rescued." There was no sadness in her voice when she said it, only fact, but Daniel heard something underneath, something quieter. "So they left you to die," he replied softly. She held his gaze for a long second, and that was the closest thing to an answer he would receive. On the central display, a new alert suddenly flashed. Long-range scanners detecting faint energy signatures, distant but moving. Her attention shifted instantly, warrior instincts overriding everything else. She activated external cameras, and the blackness of space filled the screen. Nothing visible yet, but the sensors did not lie. Something had registered the ship's restart signal. Something powerful enough to travel this far into empty territory. She turned back to Daniel sharply. "Did you transmit distress signals?" No, he answered quickly. I came alone. My ship is small. I do not even have weapons strong enough to scratch your hull. Her eyes studied him again, and for the first time he sensed hesitation, as if she was calculating a future that had not existed an hour ago. If she killed him now, she would remove a witness, eliminate a possible threat, and follow the logic of her empire. But if she did, she would also erase the only being who had chosen to save her without command or reward. You knew what I am, she said quietly. You knew my kind considers humans inferior, expendable, yet you still boarded this ship. Daniel nodded once. Yes. Why? He searched for a better answer, but found only truth. Because you were alive. The simplicity of it seemed to strike her harder than any complex explanation could have. Her species valued strength, conquest, order, but not random mercy, not uncalculated risk for a stranger. She stepped away from him and looked out through the fractured viewport toward the distant moon, silent and cold. And for a moment, the powerful Tauran commander looked almost isolated inside her own thoughts. Behind them, the scanner alert intensified, the distant energy signatures growing clearer, no longer random, now shaped, structured a formation, and she recognized the pattern instantly. Tauran military vessels, not rescue, not support, but retrieval, because in her empire failure was investigated and survivors were questioned. She faced Daniel again, her voice lower now, but sharper. If my fleet finds you here, they will not ask why you helped me. I guess that, he said quietly. And they will not hesitate, she continued. They will destroy your ship first. Daniel glanced toward the docking corridor, calculating distance to his own vessel, knowing escape might already be impossible. But strangely, he did not feel regret, only tension. She moved toward him once more, closer than before, her presence no longer purely threatening, but intensely focused. In my culture, she said slowly, a life saved creates obligation, a debt that must be repaid. He blinked slightly, unsure where this was leading. I should have killed you when I woke, she admitted calmly. That is what a Tauran commander would do. Outside, space remained silent, but on the sensor display the approaching fleet signatures burned brighter, closing the distance. She looked directly into his eyes, and this time there was no confusion there, only decision forming. But you are still alive, she said, and the meaning behind those words carried more weight than any weapon in the room. The approaching fleet forced time to move faster, but the real danger was still inside the ship, because even though the auxiliary systems were stable, the main core remained damaged, and without it the warship could not jump to faster than light speed, could not defend properly, and could not survive a direct encounter with a Tauran battle formation. The alien commander walked toward the central engineering display and activated a full structural scan. Layers of holographic schematics unfolded. In the air, complex and precise, showing the heart of the ship deep below them. And Daniel felt small just looking at it. The reactor design was unlike anything humans used, built around a compressed energy sphere held in place by gravitic anchors and phased magnetic rings. Elegant and terrifying at the same time. The primary drive fractured during battle, she explained in a steady voice, but there was something personal beneath it. My engineers attempted containment. They failed command-ordered evacuation. You said they abandoned you, Daniel replied quietly. They followed protocol, she corrected, though this time the words sounded less solid. She expanded the schematic, highlighting a section near the core. A series of interlocking stabilizers twisted and burned. The gravitic alignment collapsed here. We do not possess portable recalibration tools capable of restoring it in field conditions. Daniel stepped closer, studying the design carefully. He did not understand every symbol, but he understood systems, and systems always told stories if you looked long enough. He leaned in, noticing something odd about the stabilizer arrangement. The design assumed perfect synchronization between 3 anchor nodes, but 2 of them had been damaged unevenly, creating micro delays in energy flow. Delays so small alien sensors might ignore them, but large enough to cause instability under full load. Your engineers tried to replace the broken nodes, he said slowly, tracing the hologram with his finger, but they kept the original synchronization pattern. She glanced at him sharply. That is the only approved configuration. Approved does not mean correct under damage, he replied, and there was no arrogance in his tone, only focus. The delay here and here, he pointed to the two scorched nodes, is not identical, so the third node overcompensates. It creates feedback, not balance. Her eyes narrowed. Processing, because in Tower and Doctrine core systems were considered perfect by design, flaws were blamed on operators, not architecture. You are suggesting structural doctrine error, she said carefully. I am suggesting the engine is trying to correct itself based on a condition that no longer exists, Daniel answered. It is fighting a ghost version of its own symmetry. Silence filled the bridge as the distant fleet signatures grew stronger on the scanner, each second bringing them closer. And finally, she made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours ago. You will have access to the core, she said, but understand this, if your theory is wrong, the containment field will fail, and this vessel will not simply explode, it will tear space around it. Daniel swallowed, because he knew she was not exaggerating, but he nodded anyway. Then we should hurry. They moved quickly through the damaged corridors toward the reactor chamber. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became. Emergency coolant lines hissing, warning lights flashing along the walls. When the massive doors to the core room opened, Daniel felt the vibration before he saw the source. In the center of the chamber hovered the compressed energy sphere, unstable and flickering, arcs of blue lightning snapping against weakened gravitic rings. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, like a star trapped in a cage that was slowly breaking. Radiation readings spiked on his portable scanner, high but survivable for short exposure. He knelt near the first stabilizer node, opening a maintenance panel with tools that looked painfully simple next to alien machinery. She watched him closely, not interfering but ready to act if containment faltered. He disconnected the damaged synchronization relay and rewired it through a manual phase shifter from his own kit. Crude but flexible, sweat ran down his face as the energy sphere pulsed. Harder, reacting to the disturbance. Containment fluctuation increasing, she warned, her voice steady but louder over the rising hum. I know, he replied, adjusting calibration values by hand. I need to force the third node to stop compensating. He moved to the second stabilizer, repeating the process, but this time the energy spike nearly knocked him off his feet. The chamber lights flickered violently, and for one terrible second the gravitic field warped, bending the air itself. She stepped forward instinctively, catching him before he hit the floor, her grip strong enough to break bone yet controlled. If this fails, she said sharply, we will not have time to regret it. It will not fail, he answered, though he was not entirely certain. Finally, he accessed the central control column, overriding the automated symmetry protocol and inputting a manual offset. A risky move that alien engineers would never approve. The energy sphere reacted instantly, flaring bright white, alarms screaming across the chamber, the stabilizer rings spinning at uneven speeds, and then everything seemed to freeze in a single stretched second. The hum dropped in pitch. The arcs of lightning reduced to soft pulses, and the energy sphere stabilized into a steady glow. Not perfect, but controlled, the containment field smoothed out, no longer fighting itself. Daniel stepped back slowly, barely breathing, watching the readings normalize one by one. On the upper display, a new message appeared, primary drive capable of limited jump function. She stared at it, disbelief carefully hidden behind discipline. You altered core doctrine and it holds, she said quietly. Daniel gave a tired half-smile. Sometimes broken things do not need to be replaced, they need to be understood. But before relief could fully settle, the ship's long-range sensors transmitted a sharp new alert to the reactor chamber. The Tauran fleet had arrived within visual range. Massive warships emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation, weapons charging as they locked onto the restarted vessel. The core might be stable now, but the real test was about to begin, and for the first time since waking, the alien commander looked at the human engineer not as a temporary anomaly, but as something far more dangerous to her empire's beliefs, because he had just fixed the engine no one else could fix, and outside, her own people were preparing to destroy them both. The Tauran fleet filled the view screens like a wall of metal and light. Enormous warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls sharp and flawless. Weapons arrays glowing as targeting systems locked onto the damaged vessel. The alien commander stood at the center of the bridge, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, but inside her thoughts were moving faster than the ships outside. Because she knew exactly what this formation meant, it was not rescue, it was judgment in her. Empire, a commander who lost a battle, was questioned. A commander who survived when others did not was investigated, and a commander found docked with a human vessel was assumed compromised. Daniel stood near the side console. Watching the screen quietly, he understood enough about military posture to recognize danger. His small salvage ship still attached to the alien hull looked painfully weak compared to the fleet outside. One direct strike would turn it into dust, and yet he did not rush to disconnect, did not demand escape. He simply waited because he knew this was no longer just about engines and circuits. A transmission request flashed across the main display. Encoded Tauran command frequency. She accepted it without hesitation, and a holographic figure appeared in front of her. A high-ranking Tauran fleet commander, armored, older, his eyes sharp with authority. He glanced briefly at Daniel, and then focused on her. "Commander Viral," he said in a cold tone, "explain why your vessel broadcasts active human presence." The air seemed to tighten around them. Daniel could not understand their language fully, but the tone alone carried weight. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the hologram. "My ship was critically damaged," she answered calmly. "This human repaired the core. Without him, this vessel would be debris." A pause followed, heavy and dangerous. The fleet commander's gaze sharpened. "You permitted human interference in classified systems?" "I authorized survival," she replied, her voice steady. The hologram flickered slightly as the fleet recalibrated scanning beams. Daniel noticed energy readings climbing on the tactical display, weapons priming quietly in the background, and he understood something very simple. They were seconds away from being erased. The fleet commander spoke again. "Stand down, Commander Viral. Disengage from the human vessel and prepare for inspection. The human will be neutralized." Daniel felt the words, even if he did not translate them, because at that moment she finally turned her head slightly toward him, just enough for him to see the change in her eyes. There was no confusion now, no hesitation, only decision. She stepped forward, closer to the holographic image, her voice carrying across the bridge with controlled force. "The human is under my protection," she declared. The bridge fell into complete silence. Even the background hum of the ship seemed quieter. The fleet commander's expression hardened instantly. "You would defend a human against your own command?" "I would honor a life debt," she replied, and the words were not loud, but they were absolute. Daniel blinked in shock because until that moment he had not fully understood what her culture meant by obligation. He had assumed it was symbolic, formal, but now he saw it was something deeper, something binding. The fleet commander's image flickered again, tension building. "You speak as if bound by contract," he said carefully. She did not look away. "I am." The hologram vanished without another word, replaced by a warning tone as multiple Tauran ships shifted position. Tightening formation, weapons arrays adjusting for direct engagement. Daniel stepped toward her slowly. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "I can undock, try to run, maybe distract them." She turned to face him fully now, and for the first time since they met. The cold edge in her presence softened slightly, though her strength remained unmistakable. "If you leave," she said, "they will destroy you before your engines reach full output." "And if I stay?" he asked. "They may destroy us both," she answered honestly. For a brief moment, they simply stood there, two beings from species that had never trusted each other, sharing the same impossible situation, and then she did something that shocked him more than the fleet outside. She removed her outer gauntlets slowly, setting them aside on the command console, a gesture of vulnerability in Tauran culture. Then she stepped back and lowered herself onto one knee in front of him. Not as weakness, not as surrender, but as ritual. "In Tauran law," she said clearly, "a life saved binds the commander to the savior. Protection, loyalty, and service are owed until the debt is fulfilled. Daniel stared at her, unable to process what he was seeing, a powerful alien war commander kneeling before a human mechanic inside a warship surrounded by an armed fleet. "I offer myself in bond," she continued, her voice steady despite the weapons charging outside. "Not as property, not as surrender, but as equal who owes survival to you." His mind struggled to catch up. "I did not fix your ship for payment," he said quickly, almost nervously. "I just did what anyone should do." Her silver eyes held his firmly. "That is precisely why the debt exists," she replied. Outside, energy signatures spiked sharply. Target locks confirmed. The fleet had made its judgment. She rose smoothly from her kneeling position, armor plates locking back into place, her warrior posture returning instantly. But something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer about towering command versus human presence. This was about her choice. The tactical display flashed red as the fleet commander's final message appeared across the screen. Commander Viral declared compromised. Engage targets. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, but she remained steady, moving to the weapons console with calm precision. "You repaired my engine," she said without looking at him. "Now let us see if your species can survive its consequences." And as the first Tauran warship began charging its primary cannon, the offer she had made moments ago hung in the air between them. No longer symbolic, no longer cultural, but personal, because she had chosen him over her empire, and the empire was about to answer that choice with fire. The first blast came without warning, a beam of pure white energy tearing through space toward them. And for a split second Daniel thought it was over. But Commander Viral had already moved, her hands flying across the control surface with sharp precision. The repaired core responded instantly, shields flaring to life in a bright blue arc just as the blast struck. The impact shook the entire ship, metal groaning, lights flickering. Daniel grabbed the edge of a console to stay upright as the vibration ran through his bones. Outside, the Tauran fleet adjusted formation smoothly, disciplined and relentless. They did not fire in anger. They fired in certainty. "Shield capacity at 60%, Viral reported calmly, as if discussing routine training. But Daniel could see the tension in the tightness of her jaw. The fleet was not testing them. It was executing them. Another volley charged across the void, smaller ships spreading out to cut off escape vectors. Massive carriers positioning behind them like silent judges. In the center of the formation, the fleet commander's flagship remained still, watching, calculating, confident that one damaged warship and a human salvage craft could not possibly survive. Daniel rushed to the secondary console, pulling up the tactical interface. It was alien, complex, but patterns were universal. "They are boxing us in," he said quickly. "They are not just attacking. They are preventing jump alignment." Viral nodded once. "They know my core was unstable. They assume limited mobility." "Is that assumption correct?" he asked. "For now," she replied, and then another blast struck the shields, this one heavier, the blue barrier cracking visibly before stabilizing again. The ship's warning systems echoed through the bridge, and on the main screen a new transmission forced its way through interference. The fleet commander reappeared, his expression colder than before. "Commander Viral," he said, "you have chosen dishonor. Surrender the human and power down your weapons. Your status may still be reviewed." Daniel looked at her, expecting hesitation, but she did not even glance at him. "You taught me that strength defines truth," she answered the hologram evenly. This human displayed strength your fleet failed to recognize. The fleet commander's eyes darkened. "You mistake anomaly for value." "No," she replied. "I recognize evolution." The transmission cut abruptly, and this time the fleet did not hold back. Multiple warships fired in coordinated sequence, staggering their shots to overload shield recovery timing. The bridge shook violently as impacts landed one after another, sparks falling from overhead panels, shield levels dropping fast. Daniel's mind raced. He was not trained for war, but he understood systems under pressure. "Your shield modulation is reactive," he said urgently. "They are predicting recovery cycles." "That is standard Tauran combat doctrine," she replied. fingers moving rapidly across controls, returning fire with precise but limited shots that barely scratched the enemy armor. Then stop being standard, Daniel shot back, pulling up the shield frequency matrix. Randomized modulation intervals break their timing model. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before implementing the change. Shield pulses shifting unpredictably, and the next enemy volley landed unevenly, some blasts glancing off at strange angles, others dispersing inefficiently. Confusion flickered across the tactical display as the fleet recalculated. For the first time, a small gap opened in their formation, and Daniel saw something else on the sensor array, faint but growing, encrypted signals bouncing between towering ships. They were not only attacking, they were reporting, transmitting live battle data back to the Empire core worlds. They are broadcasting everything, he muttered, realizing the larger picture. This is not just punishment, this is demonstration. Yes, Viral said quietly. They intend to show the Empire what happens to those who defend humans. Outside, a cruiser moved closer, charging a heavy particle lance, the kind designed to pierce capital ship armor, and Daniel felt a cold realization settle in. Even with improved shield modulation, they could not survive a direct hit from that weapon. Viral's voice lowered slightly, more personal now despite the chaos around them. You understand that if we fall here, my empire will consider humanity a confirmed threat. Daniel met her gaze, steady despite the fear in his chest. I think they already do, he answered. The cruiser's lance reached full charge, a blinding column of energy building at its core, and every instinct told Daniel this was the final strike. But instead of retreating, instead of preparing surrender codes, Viral straightened, her posture no longer that of a commander defending a damaged ship, but of a warrior drawing a line. She opened a wide frequency channel across the entire Tauran fleet, her voice echoing through enemy bridges and command decks alike. Hear me, she declared. This human stands under my protection, and I will not withdraw it. There was no anger in her tone, only certainty. And for a brief second the fleet hesitated, not because they feared her, but because no Tauran commander had ever publicly defied Empire authority in defense of a human life. The particle lance fired, the beams screaming across space toward them, shields flaring bright as a star as it struck, the impact throwing Daniel against the console, alarms exploding across every display, shield integrity collapsing toward critical levels. And in that violent flash of light and energy, one truth became clear to both of them. The Empire did not simply distrust humans. It feared what humans represented: unpredictability, adaptability, the refusal to follow expected patterns, and that fear was now focused entirely on them. Two ships against a fleet, two choices against an empire that hated what it did not control. As the shield percentage dropped into the red and the next volley began charging, Daniel realized that surviving this battle would not just mean escape, it would mean rewriting how the Tauran Empire saw humanity forever, and the Empire was determined to make sure that rewrite never happened. The shields were failing. The warning lights were no longer flashing in rhythm but screaming without pause, and every logical calculation said the same thing: detach the human ship, jump away if possible, survive separately. But Daniel did not move toward the docking controls. He did not prepare escape coordinates. Instead, he leaned closer to the tactical console, eyes scanning data streams, as if this were just another broken machine waiting to be understood. Outside, the Tauran fleet tightened. Formation again after the shield modulation surprise, adjusting to the new pattern with disciplined efficiency. They were vast, powerful, organized, and absolutely certain that time favored them. We cannot outgun them, Viral said sharply as another wave of impacts rattled the hull. We cannot outnumber them. Daniel nodded quickly, fingers already moving across unfamiliar controls. Then we outthink them, he replied. She glanced at him briefly, and in that look there was no doubt anymore about his capability, only urgency. Explain, she demanded. They fight in perfect synchronization, he said, pulling up fleet telemetry. Their formation assumes you will react like a Tauran commander: defensive arcs, predictive retreats, structured return fire. That is standard doctrine. she answered, bracing as the ship shook again. Exactly, Daniel said, and his voice was calm now, focused in the middle of chaos, so stop being Tauren. He accessed the weapon control matrix and hesitated only a second before linking it to his own ship's navigation computer. Crude human software meeting elegant alien hardware. Alarms protested the unauthorized interface, but he forced the connection through. Viral watched carefully, but did not stop him. She had already crossed the line of trust. There was no going halfway now. What are you doing? She asked as targeting reticles flickered unpredictably across the screen. Your weapons are stronger, he replied, but your targeting logic is linear. It predicts movement in clean arcs. Human pilots fly messy. He overrode the firing sequence and fed in randomized micro-adjustments pulled from thousands of recorded human combat simulations. Chaotic vector shifts, sudden decelerations, irrational-looking maneuvers that no Tauren tactical AI would expect. Then he transferred partial control of the warship's thrusters to his smaller salvage ship, effectively linking them into one unstable but unified system. The next enemy volley fired, but instead of absorbing the hits in a straight defensive posture, their ship twisted sharply at the last possible second, shields angled at irregular geometry, deflecting part of the blast sideways. The maneuver looked reckless, almost clumsy, but the damage was far less than predicted. Confusion rippled across the Tauren formation as their targeting solutions recalculated and failed to match expected response curves. Now return fire, Daniel said quickly. Viral did not hesitate. She triggered a full spread from the port cannons, but Daniel's new targeting logic shifted the aim unpredictably. Instead of focusing on the largest cruiser as doctrine demanded, the volley struck at the communication relay ship near the rear of the formation, a vessel lightly armored but critical for fleet coordination. The blast hit hard, shields collapsing in seconds under concentrated fire. The relay ship's signal flickered and then went dark. On the main display, the Tauren formation wavered for the first time, small gaps forming as ships attempted to re-establish command hierarchy manually. Their perfect synchronization fractured into separate reaction times. You targeted their coordination node, Viral observed, and there was something like respect in her tone. You said they're broadcasting everything, Daniel answered, adjusting thrust patterns again. So let us make the broadcast messy. Another cruiser attempted to flank them, charging its weapons for a close-range strike. But Daniel pushed both ships into an aggressive forward surge instead of retreating, accelerating directly toward the cruiser at a speed that seemed suicidal. Tauren doctrine expected withdrawal under pressure, not advance, and the cruiser hesitated half a second too long. That was all Viral needed. She fired a concentrated burst at the cruiser's exposed weapon array during its charge cycle. The explosion tore through its front hull, forcing it to pull back heavily damaged. The fleet commander's flagship moved forward now, massive and imposing, and even with fractured coordination, it remained dangerous beyond measure. Energy readings spiking as it prepared a wide-area suppression blast, something designed to wipe out smaller ships regardless of maneuver. Daniel saw the charge pattern forming and felt the weight of reality pressing in again. Cleverness could only go so far against overwhelming power, but instead of disengaging, he rerouted the last stable portion of the core's output to shield reinforcement on one narrow axis, creating a focus barrier rather than full coverage. That will leave the rest of the hull exposed, Viral warned. Yes, he replied simply. The flagship fired, a massive wave of energy spreading across space, and at the last instant Daniel rotated the ship, so the reinforced shield axis faced the heart of the blast. The focus barrier held just long enough to punch a hole through the wave, allowing them to surge forward through the thinning energy field instead of being consumed by it. The rest of the hull scorched and rattled, but intact. They emerged on the other side of the blast shock, closer to the flagship than any Tauren vessel had expected, inside minimum targeting range for its largest cannons. And before the flagship could adjust, Viral unleashed every forward weapon at once, striking sensor clusters and external emitters rather than heavy armor, blinding portions of the ship and forcing it to fall back from precise engagement. Across the fleet, panic did not show openly, but hesitation did. Their perfect structure was gone. their assumptions broken, and for the first time the idea that a human mind could destabilize a Tauran battle group became real. Fleet pulling back to re-establish formation. Viral reported, watching the enemy ships widen their distance, not retreating fully, but no longer pressing the attack. Daniel finally allowed himself one deep breath, though his hands were still moving, adjusting systems, reinforcing weak points. He had not run. He had not chosen survival through escape. He had chosen to stay and fight in a way no Tauran strategist could predict. Far beyond the immediate battlefield, encrypted transmissions continued to stream toward the Empire's core worlds, battle data, maneuver recordings, tactical anomalies labeled under one classification, human variable. And as the damaged but still operational warship and the small human salvage craft hovered together in the dark, surrounded by a fleet that no longer seemed invincible, one truth began to spread through Tauran command networks. Humans were not dangerous because of strength. They were dangerous because they refused to behave as expected, and that unpredictability could not be easily contained. The battlefield did not end with an explosion. It ended with distance. The Tauran fleet slowly widening its formation, damaged ships pulling back into protective arcs around the flagship. Weapons still active but no longer firing, as if the Empire itself was thinking, recalculating, trying to understand what had just happened. Commander Viral stood at the center of the bridge, breathing steady but deeper than before, watching her own people hesitate for the first time in her life, and beside her Daniel remained at the console, hands resting lightly on the controls, ready for another maneuver if needed, but no longer forcing movement. The silence between volleys felt heavier than the battle itself. A final transmission came from the flagship, not loud, not filled with anger, but cold and official. Commander Viral, the fleet commander said, his image appearing once more on the damaged bridge. You have demonstrated tactical deviation beyond acceptable doctrine. Your bond to the human is acknowledged, but your loyalty to the Empire is now in question. You are ordered to stand down and return for tribunal. Daniel looked at her carefully, because this was the real moment, not the fight, not the survival, but the choice that would shape everything after. She did not answer immediately, her silver eyes studying the fleet, the ships she had once commanded beside, the Empire she had served without doubt, and for a brief second the weight of her history was visible in her stillness. If I return, she said slowly, her voice steady across open channels, the human will be executed, and humanity will be classified as an active destabilizing force. That is already under consideration, the fleet commander replied. Then my return changes nothing, she answered calmly. The hologram flickered as tension moved through the fleet command network, and Daniel felt something shift in the air, not fear, not rage, but inevitability. She turned toward him fully now, ignoring the fleet for a moment, as if it no longer held primary importance. In my culture, she said quietly, though her voice still carried across the channel, a bond once declared cannot be broken without loss of honor. Daniel met her gaze, unsure what she would say next. I will not break it, she continued, and then she faced the fleet commander again. I renounce active command within the Tauran Empire. I claim exile status under ancient code. I choose to stand with the human who saved my life. The words were simple, but their impact was enormous. Silence spread across the Tauran fleet. Not confusion now, but shock. Exile was rare, almost unheard of among commanders. It meant giving up rank, protection, influence, everything that defined identity within the Empire. The fleet commander's expression hardened into something unreadable. Exile acknowledged, he said finally. Your vessel will not be pursued beyond this sector. But know this, Commander Viral, the Empire does not forget deviation. I expect it to remember, she replied evenly. The transmission ended, and one by one the Tauran warships turned away, engines igniting in controlled flashes as they entered jump formation. Within moments the massive fleet vanished in a hyperspace, leaving behind only scattered debris and silence. On the bridge, systems stabilized gradually, warning lights fading, shield levels recovering slowly. Daniel leaned back against the console and let out a long breath he had been holding since the first shot was fired. So, he said softly. Does exile come with paperwork? For the first time since waking on her damaged ship, Viral allowed the faintest hint of something close to a smile. Not wide, not careless, but real. It comes with consequence, she answered. He nodded, glancing at the tactical logs, still streaming data. Your empire recorded everything, he said, the way we fought, the way you chose. Yes, she replied, stepping closer to the viewport where the cold moon drifted silently below. And now they must decide whether humanity is prey, threat, or potential. Daniel followed her gaze, and for the first time he saw the larger horizon, not just survival of two ships, but the beginning of something far more complex. If they come for Earth, he said quietly. They will not come blindly again, she interrupted. They have seen what one human engineer can do with limited tools and imperfect knowledge. A new signal appeared on Daniel's console. Not Tauran, but human, distant patrol stations detecting unusual battle signatures, confused reports asking for identification. He looked at her. My people are going to have questions. As will mine, she answered. He studied her for a moment, this powerful alien warrior who had lost her empire in a single decision, and yet did not look broken. Only resolved. You do not have to stay, he said gently. Exile does not require alliance. She turned toward him fully, silver eyes calm and certain. I did not choose exile to drift alone, she replied. I chose it because I saw something in your species my empire refuses to see. And what is that? He asked. She stepped beside him at the viewport, both of them looking toward the distant stars where the fleet had vanished. You do not dominate through size or tradition, she said softly. You adapt, you question, you fix what others abandon. Outside, space remained endless and dark, but it no longer felt empty. It felt changed, as if a quiet line had been crossed somewhere deep in the galaxy. Daniel activated the communication array, preparing to contact human command, knowing that the conversation ahead would be difficult, political, dangerous, but necessary, and beside him stood a former Tauran commander who had just reshaped interstellar balance by refusing to follow expectation. Far beyond their position, in distant sectors of space, other civilizations monitored Tauran military traffic, analyzing the same battle data, now spreading through hidden networks, and for the first time a new variable entered their calculations, not Tauran strength, not fleet size, but human unpredictability. As their joined ships slowly set course toward human territory, leaving the battlefield behind, one truth settled quietly between them. This was not the end of a conflict. It was the beginning of an alliance neither Empire nor Earth had planned for, and somewhere in the vast darkness ahead, powers older and greater than the Tauran were already watching, wondering what kind of species would risk everything simply because someone was alive and needed fixing.